Okay, so we're going to start, and I think we should start by Martin Sensei, you introducing yourself and why you are qualified to answer the questions that I'm about to ask you.
Right. Well, the first of all, it's Dr. Lindley Sensei. I've got a PhD in exercise physiology. I got an undergraduate in sports science. I got a master's in sports science, and then a PhD in exercise physiology. And I've actually worked as an applied sports scientist with a variety of different sports, but most with the Welsh hockey squads. So I've taken international athletes up to multiple Commonwealth Games, World Cups, European Championships, etc., etc. I currently work in Loughborough University, which is the QS Global Rank #1 Sports Science Institute. So I'm surrounded by sports science. I work as a sports scientist.
Cool. And I'm qualified because I can read and speak, but not at the same time. So
yes, one by one.
One by one. So we're gonna. So the idea of this is that we're gonna hopefully have kind of scientific answers to the stuff that we actually do in karate, and you are uniquely qualified to answer my unique questions. So shall we start?
There we go.
But they're not
we'll give that a go.
Yeah, let's do it. So let's start with. Is punching power like Mike Tyson and Conor McGregor and was it Deontay Wilder? Purely genetic, or can it be trained?
The simple, quick answer is yes, it can be trained. Anybody can learn how to hit harder. Those individuals mentioned people who train specifically to hit hard. They may have a natural coordination, a natural timing, a natural muscular strength, and then they've maximized their potential. However, if you take any individual, you can train them to hit harder, and if all you want to do is hit hard, you can learn how to hit very hard indeed.
So, okay, but so hitting hard is just obviously the bigger you are and the faster you can move. Is that the only two factors that is hitting hard?
No, there's a coordination effect. So you can have a very large mass, but if it is not stabilized correctly, and if it's not hitting the correct point at the correct time, the mass will do damage, but it won't do anywhere near as much damage as it could have done. So there's multiple factors involved, and they all have to come together at the same time for them to work.
What do you mean by... Because obviously there's mass and then there's effective mass, right? So you could be really big, but if you're not kind of transferring all that mass into your punch, then it's not effective, right? Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, and that's a coordination effect. So if you're in a stance, you're a big guy, you're in a front stance, and you punch with your arms and your shoulders, and you don't engage the hip rotation, then you're not going to be able to use any mass other than your arm.
Yeah.
Now, it may be that your arm is a big enough mass that you can do lots of damage, but if you can learn to use your body, the whole mass, then you'll get bigger impacts. Now, in order to use that whole body, you have to coordinate. There's a neuromuscular coordination, but there's also a skeletal positioning as well.
Okay, so tell me about the neuromuscular coordination first. What does that mean?
Well, you have. Take your arm, for instance, you've got agonists and antagonists. You've got muscles that will create a movement and muscles that are acting the opposite direction. Yeah. You have to be able to relax one muscle and contract the other in order for the body to move freely. But you need your ancillary muscles, your supporting muscles, to be relaxed while the body is moving, but you need them to be contracted at a point of impact so they stabilize the joint.
Okay. So what you're saying, like, if you're going to punch somebody, like you're saying that you're having to use obviously your tricep to kind of straighten your arm, but on the point of impact you've got to engage your bicep as well in order to stabilize the. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, you got your elbow joint and your shoulder joint, and you've got your bicep and tricep both working that area of the body. Yeah. You need that joint to be aligned correctly so that it doesn't dislocate. You can hit your. Well, you as you can probably tell from my right arm, you can do yourself lots of damage if your body is not correctly lined up if it's not contracting at the right times at the right places.
Okay.
I mean, if you're, for instance, you mentioned the bicep contracting to straighten the arm. If you're actually whipping your arm out in a relaxed state, you probably won't be contracting your tricep.
Okay.
You'll co-contract your bicep and your tricep later on in the movement to stabilize the arm, but you'll probably have a relaxed tricep because your arm's being thrown forward by the movement of your body and the rotation.
Okay. Cool. Okay, we might come onto that again later. But and then you said skeletal alignment. Is that what you said?
Yeah, skeletal alignment. So I'm a classic example of that in that I've got a right arm that was broken in a motorbike accident.
Right.
So the orthopedic surgeon took a piece of the bone that was floating in the joint out, and when he put my elbow back together again, he didn't line it up properly.
Okay.
So my left arm and my right arm are not skeletally the same.
Right.
Now it's quite a big difference because I've broken it, but everybody's left and right arm is different.
Yeah.
Nobody's got exactly the same alignment. So we will have a slightly different punch on your left to your right, even if you're just doing static chokazuki. If you add in your stance and the difference between people's hip positions and leg lengths, etc., then you'll find that there is a position which is skeletally aligned correctly. So the forces are being transferred through the whole body and not stopping, as it were, at a joint center.
Okay.
So you'll know this if you hit a heavy bag.
Yeah.
Hit a heavy bag, if your wrist is aligned, you won't feel the impact on your wrist. You change your position of your hand slightly as you hit the heavy bag, you will notice a pain transfer in the wrist area.
Yeah.
That's because the skeletal alignment wasn't quite right, and the forces, instead of traveling back through the arm, are actually torquing that joint.
And so, like, because Okinawan karate talk a lot about that, about those connection points. So wrist, shoulder, kind of your hip, your back foot, where all those kind of connection points have to be aligned in order to transfer power efficiently. That's basically what you mean, yeah?
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. But that alignment can be a skeletal alignment and a muscular alignment, and you can actually pull your skeletal alignment out by tensing the muscles.
Okay.
So you can be put in the correct position and have the correct stance and position and be told to move your hips. But if you start tensing your body and you're tensing the muscles on one side, you will actually change that alignment slightly. So, I mean, we're talking very small percentages that are probably not perceptible to the human eye, but they are very perceptible when you get the biofeedback of hitting something.
So, like, I mean, always the answer to that, and like Steve Ubel Sensei talks about that as well, is about kind of always hit something every day, and you'll constantly get I mean, you never get these kind of full contact guys looking tense in their training, right? They're always super relaxed. Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in training in the 80s. We hit heavy bags all the time. I was only a kid, so I was allowed to hit people all the time. Makarao training is fundamental, as it were.
Yeah.
But it's a lot and lots of people nowadays aren't hitting things.
Yeah.
And therefore they're not getting any type of biofeedback, so they can't see it because it's too small, and they can't feel it because they're not hitting things.
Yeah. Like I was training with training with Simon Bly Sensei recently, and he said something interesting. He said, like karate is Shotokan karate specifically is the most catalogued form of all martial arts. And there's books been written about it, and people talk in minute detail about how you should pivot on your heel and blah 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 and all that kind of stuff. And I think the point he was making is sometimes at the detriment to the practical application of that art, because people are just constantly thinking, oh well, I want to twist this part and inflect that part and do this, that, and the other, rather than just hitting something and getting the feedback to teach yourself how to align correctly.
Yeah, and that comes from a very traditional way of thinking about how you train. And you can separate the Japanese from the Chinese arts in that way. In that, if you've ever trained in a Chinese martial art, you'll find it is much less regimented, much less traditional based. Well, as we think of tradition, it's very traditional in that they find your own way.
Okay.
So when I'm doing Tai Chi form, the instructor comes over and I say, is my elbow too high? And he'll say, how would I know? and then he'll push me.
Yeah.
He'll push my body.
Yeah.
And say, your arm didn't collapse. It must be correct.
Okay.
And they do a lot of testing, a bit like the Goju when they do all the sanding exercises and they bash each other to death.
Yeah.
But it's much more complex than that.
Yeah.
They do an awful lot of finding out if it's right for you. Are you in the correct position? Not the correct picture that we show you a diagram of.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of Japanese, as you said, it's very documented.
Yeah.
There's loads of books. You'll pick up the best karate books. You'll pick up the dynamic karate. You'll pick up and you'll see a picture, and people will say, "That's what I want to be."
Yeah.
Well, biology would suggest that method will only be correct in 1 in a million people.
Yeah.
Because you'll have to be the same as the person in the picture for it to work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. I was in Norway last weekend, and I was talking to a chap who does Shiryu karate and also Tai Chi, and he was saying that when one of his instructors from Tai Chi would teach just by sitting down and saying yes or no, and so he'd say, "Oh, swing your arm, no, no, no," and he's swinging it and swing, no, oh yes, yeah, there, do it again, no. Yeah. No. Oh yeah, that one. No. And like often we often think about kind of Chinese styles as very traditional, as if they follow an archetype. Like there was some sort of archetype back in the past, which, like what you just said, is not true at all, right? I've actually talked about how kind of karate, Shotokan karate, you can't have a traditional martial art. It's either an art, which is constantly evolving, or a tradition where you follow an archetype of generations ago. Almost tradition and art are oxymoronic. But actually the traditional martial arts of China, if they're taught that way, the tradition is self-evaluation, or not self-evaluation, but self-fulfillment, where you're finding your own way. Whereas the Japanese martial arts, that kind of sense of shuhari and finding your own way has somehow, in many cases, been lost, where you have these archetypes of an Oida sensei or Kanazawa sensei, or following some kind of great sensei that you have to follow, which is really not what anybody wants to do, right? We want to find our own way.
Yeah, I mean, it's the way I've always looked at karate. So, well, not always. When I first started, I followed the pattern. I did what my instructor did. My instructor was Ray Cooper. He was 6'2", 6'3". His instructor was Sensei Frank Cope, who is 5'3". Yeah. Completely different people. Yeah. So Frank Cope used to come down and grade us, and he'd look completely and utterly different to Ray, who'd been teaching us all the time. Yeah. So very quickly, I learned that it's not about following that pattern; it's about getting it right. But yeah, I see karate very much as a teaching tool, a stepping stone, to get you to a physical place where you can start to learn yourself. Yeah. That's so cool. You kill yourself through your first dan, get your black belt, and then you start learning. Yeah. Yeah. But I think there's a lot of instructors who haven't gone through that learning themselves, and therefore repeat what they went through, which is just the pragmatic step 1, step 2, let's go up the ladder.
Yeah, actually, I recently wrote an article, actually, but like one part of the things I said was and it was a little bit like about this, but one of the things I said was like it'd be awful to kind of pound away in the dojo countless repetitions only to realize that you've been following someone else's path after literally decades of doing someone else's karate and never really finding your own karate. And I think above all else, a lot of Shotokan, especially with the dogmatic way that we organizations have become, is that it's kind of almost geared up to follow the 1 or 2 people at the top, and that's how they do it, that's how we all have got to do it, and I think nothing is farther from the truth sometimes. Yeah, I mean, you'll find it's not just karate. If I look at all the martial arts, and you will see that groups splinter, and new groups form, and inevitably the person leading that new group will be teaching a martial art that suits them, that they've developed. I mean, you look at the Bruce Lee story, and spent his entire time preaching that you needed to find the best of everything that fitted you. Yeah. And if you go to America now, you will find a martial arts setup which is based on this is how Bruce Lee did it. Yeah, absolutely.
But that's not what he preached, because he understood the biomechanics are different from person to person.
Yeah.
He understood that your muscular contraction times, they are set to a level, but your level of training before you start those martial arts will have a big impact on it. So people do have physiological limitations. People do have flexibility limitations. It's not about going into the splits and jumping on somebody's shoulders till they break.
Yeah. And I think what's worse is that the people who do get to that point where they are the leader of the organization, they're often the outliers, the physical outliers, and they're doing a karate that probably 95% of the students can't even possibly emulate in any way, because they're stronger, fitter, more flexible, more elastic, wherever it is, and they end up producing or preaching a type of karate that is almost inaccessible to people.
Yeah, I always say that if you look at the Olympics and you take all the athletes in the Olympics, you haven't got a single healthy athlete there, because they've all pushed their bodies to the extreme level. And if we look at science in general, we talk about taking a data set and taking a large group of people and getting a mean and a standard deviation, looking at the variance in the group. And in sports science, I preach the opposite. I say, here's 100 long distance runners. Let's throw all their data away and let's look at the person who won. This is how they achieved their winning. These other people, they train just as hard, they put as many hours in, they do nothing else, but it hasn't been successful for them. You look at the middle distance running, we used to have a Western approach and an African approach. And the Africans won everything. Right. So what we did is we just changed our approach, and now everybody runs the African way.
Okay.
And yet the Africans still win. And so it's not about finding, it's not the one way, it's the way that works for you.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So let's move on to the next question. So, actually, because we mentioned, you talked about kind of the Tai Chi. So Simon Bly, actually, we also mentioned Simon, so we'll talk about Simon as well. He has said that he knows that you've studied Tai Chi, and is this really the grand ultimate martial arts? Is it mechanically, physically superior to karate? And is Chi just simply the perfect technique? What do you think?
Right. There's several questions there.
Yeah.
The first one, is it the ultimate martial art? I don't believe so. I don't believe there is an ultimate martial art. The way in which it's taught, I think, allows you to develop in your own way, and therefore allows you to maximize your personal potential. There's the idea of Qi. We're into traditional Chinese medicine here, and I'm a biochemist, so I'm conflicted. The way I see the work that I've been doing in Tai Chi is that the getting to Qi flowing through your system requires alignment.
Okay.
Now, if you align your system, that means your biological process is going to work maximally. So I would see Qi flowing being correct biological, physiological, biochemical, neurological alignment. What you call it, we can argue in circles, but it works very well.
Okay.
But I see this in karate. I'm striving to achieve those same alignments in my technique. So when I taught in America, I ran the club in Indiana University. I went back for seminars, and I teach the very traditional solid fist. This is how you punch. This is how we're rotating. I finished a day seminar, and this head instructor was talking to the students saying, see, this hitting with a relaxed hand doesn't work. This is the best way to do it. And I said, well, no, the seminar I just did was all about traditional karate doing it this way.
Yeah.
I said, I can hit you really hard with a very relaxed fist as well.
Yeah.
I just have to do it differently. So then there was a series of students that had to get knocked down in order to see that it was the same power. But the William C.C. Chen is the Grand Master of the Yang's family style that I work on, and he's hit me harder than anybody else I've ever felt.
Really?
And if you look at the list of instructors I've trained with, that's a very, very prestigious statement to make.
Yeah.
He's a tiny little man, and he dropped me as if it was the easiest thing in the world.
And what do you credit that to? Just alignment?
Just alignment.
Relaxation, alignment.
The relaxation, that's alignment. He has very little mass.
Yeah.
He didn't move it very quickly.
Yeah.
But mass he did have, and the direction he moved was all perfectly aligned.
Yeah.
And I literally thought he'd ruptured internal organs.
Really?
And he giggled and smiled as he helped me back up.
Yeah.
One of the things that his stable does in New York, he's famous throughout the professional boxing ranks, and the professional boxers in New York go to him to learn how to hit hard.
Really?
Now, he doesn't teach them the Tai Chi hand, he doesn't teach them the Tai Chi form, he teaches them how to hit hard.
Yeah.
So he takes their boxing technique and aligns their technique so it's aligned correctly for them.
Yeah.
They end up hitting very hard.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to that kind of structural, like skeletal and muscular alignment that you were talking about before, and like the very much affect that tension. I often say like the anticipation of like someone will have the anticipation of hitting someone, which will cause tension, which then raises the shoulder or wherever it is, and so even the very thought of making contact kind of disability or kind of takes away their ability a little bit to make that impact that they want to create. So I mean, it comes down to kind of really correct alignment and relaxation to produce the speed, and then, like you said, stabilizing the joint on impact, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in biology.
Yeah.
And if the biological systems are all working, then there's nothing unique about Conor McGregor. There's nothing unique about Deontay Wilder. There's nothing. They are DNA, their chromosomes, their proteins. Yeah. They've gone through a training regime which has maximized their genetic potential.
Yeah.
Essentially, they have, bones, muscles, nerves, everything the same. They've learned how to use it well.
And what do you think? Because I often, in fact, I was talking about this last weekend when I was away. Someone talked about kind of kime, and we got into a whole debate about what is kime, and what I was saying was really obviously the term kime comes from Japanese kimeru, to be decisive, the decisive part of the technique, or just the verb to decide. So it's the decisive part of the technique, but really the sense that like kime is really kind of a reaction to making the contact rather than a desire to hit someone. So like I kind of was talking about how like you get that tactile kind of response of actually making contact with someone, which then forces you to kind of create, hopefully you got the alignment, but create the muscular support for that alignment to be able to transfer your mass effectively. Would you agree with that, or am I talking rubbish?
Yeah, I mean it's a Japanese word, it's a Japanese concept, and it gets taught lots of different ways. Back in the 80s, I was taught it was tension.
Yeah.
But it was tension only at the end of the technique. Whereas you see in other places, there's an awful lot. If you don't have tension at all times, then you have no kime. If you wish to move quick, you must be relaxed. There can be no tension.
Yeah.
If your technique reaches its completion, the end of the technique, then it's no longer the technique.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you wish your technique to work, it needs to physically needs to stop at the end of the technique, and therefore your kime is the completion of that technique. Now it's bouncing a ball. If you bounce a ball, it goes down to the floor, it bounces back up again. It must stop before it comes back up.
Yeah.
But it's a point of deformation when all the energy rebounds and comes back up again. Well, we don't want that deformation and that rebound energy. We want that transfer of energy into the whatever you're hitting.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a kime, a focus, a tension, an ending of the technique, which is that end point where you need to stabilize and ensure that the force is where you want it to be and not coming back up your arm.
Okay, cool. So Tai Chi is not the ultimate martial art, but is maybe a really good way to fulfill your own potential.
Yeah, it comes down basically. I have a firm belief that there is no great martial art. There are only great martial artists and great martial art instructors.
Yeah.
I took Tai Chi up because I found a very, very good instructor.
Yeah.
Not because I wanted to do Tai Chi.
Yeah.
And the Tai Chi I do enhances my karate immeasurably. I'm not a Tai Chi instructor or a Tai Chi practitioner.
Yeah.
I've just used it to help me get better at doing my karate. But I did that because I found a good instructor.
Yeah. I'm very much like Rick Houghton, who found, Satomi Sensei. I mean, like, I don't think he would consider himself an Aikido ka, but certainly he's taken the principles that great martial artist teaches and applied them to karate to fantastic results, yeah?
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. Cool. Okay, shall we move on?
Indeed.
Okay. So, where are you? There you are. How should older karateka adapt their training methods as the joints biomechanically change? Now that actually was asked from Barry, who is a consultant orthopedic surgeon at the Santry Sports Clinic, which is one of the best kind of sporting hospitals, and kind of just sorts out all the, like, for example, the Irish rugby team and all that kind of stuff. So he's probably, and he's also a shodan at karate with in my dojo. So there we go. What do you think?
Well, number one, how's he doing fixing pec pulls off the humerus?
Yeah.
The idea of aging needs really to be conceptualized. So for a human body, you are either growing or you're aging. So as you go through your child development, you are growing. You hit puberty, you grow differently. You reach maturity and you stop growing. Now your musculature can still develop, but you're not essentially growing.
Yeah.
And from that point onwards, you're aging. You're downhill.
Yeah.
Your biological systems are getting worse than they were before.
Yeah.
But the change is very, very small, imperceptible. So when we're 20 to 30 years of age, we feel we're indestructible because we feel at the top of our physiological game.
Yeah.
But we've already aged 10 years. Our systems are going down.
Yeah.
So when people talk about changing their training because they're getting older, I'd say it's too late. Their body is already aged,
Yeah.
and they've been doing a certain type of training, and therefore they need big changes. But big changes are very difficult in the training. So I think the important thing is to adapt your training on a daily basis. And if your physiological systems are working well, then you train hard. And if your physiological systems aren't working well, then you don't.
Yeah.
So if you're a 50-year-old martial artist going in the gym, there may be days that you physically cannot do the same amount of volume intensity of work that the rest of the class are doing and that you're trying to do. And I think the older you get, the more you need to realize that.
Yeah.
You also need more recovery time as you get older. So being able to do 5-day-a-week training sessions isn't going to work as you get older because your body will not recover in time. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't do very intense sessions and you can't do them very well. It just means that you have to do that intensity less often.
Yeah.
So again, it comes back to being an individual and knowing and understanding your body and working with that. Because there's so many different examples of very elderly martial artists who are phenomenally technically sound and phenomenally physiologically sound.
Yeah.
But they didn't make any big changes as they got older. They just adapted and changed as they went.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's something that I have really become aware of recently. You know, like, well, not recently, but like, you know, I'm 47 in a couple of months. But you know, I kind of as I go through my 40s, kind of realize that I'm not 35 anymore, which is what I obviously feel. But like, I often think about it in this way, that like, there's no real cell in your body that is more than 7 years old, right? I mean, like, there's no bit of your body that is, because the cells, you know, kind of replicate themselves every 7 years. So in a sort of like chronological age, like your cells are kind of being replaced with what they were. So it's not how old you are, it's how old you've allowed yourself to become. So like, if you break your arm, and there's a a kind of there was a break there, and the cells will be regenerated as if it had been broken and repaired itself. So you're kind of regenerating yourself as you've become, rather than just a general inevitable aging process. So I just kind of think, if I maintain my flexibility, I will be flexible until I die. If I maintain my fitness, I will be fit until I die. It's just, I think these people who have allowed themselves over that aging process to become inflexible and unfit, then that's what they are. So to get back to being flexible and fit must be a really big uphill task. So I'm just kind of trying to maintain fitness and flexibility and all those things as I slowly, inevitably get old. But at the same time, I am super aware of how much load my body can take. Because 20 years ago, I could intensively train, day in, day out, and my body could take it. Whereas nowadays, I find myself having to stop from pushing myself to take that load, although I can take it, but the recovery time afterwards is far greater. So that's basically what you're saying, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, there's from a scientific perspective, putting numbers on how long your body regenerates is always tricky. I tell my students that it's about 20 years start to finish before you have completely changed the carbon load in the body. Uh-huh. Yeah, you are essentially going through a regenerative process. Yeah. But the aging process cannot be overcome, but it can be slowed down. Yeah. And this, if you take a look at smoking and destruction of the lungs with smoking, the lungs age. You don't notice it at 30, but they are smaller than when they were at 20. You just have an inevitability. Yeah. If you smoke, you will notice your lung capacity changing earlier. Yeah. If you then stop smoking, that speed of decline is arrested, but you go back to the normal speed of decline, which is the aging process. Yeah. So the more you can do to slow that process, the better. But you'll never stop it. So when you hit 50, you will know that your body is not capable, but it's not capable of what it was able to do yesterday, or last week, or last month, or last year, or last 10 years, or last 50 years. But we just only notice it when we have large events, like turning 37.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we've answered his question. So I've answered Ross's question, Simon's question, Brian's question. I have a question that I said, that I sent you. So I want to ask a couple of them, and then you can decide. Maybe as our last question seems we've been going for like 45 minutes or so, you can decide which one of these you want to answer. Is that okay?
Yeah, good.
Okay, so what are the misconceptions with martial artists when it comes to training their body? Do you want to answer that one? That was easy, right? For you.
Yeah, that's fairly easy.
Okay, go on, answer that, then I'll ask you a hard one.
Cool. The first point is that everybody thinks their body's the same. Everybody thinks that they will adapt to training the same way as everybody else adapts to training. Everybody believes that their body is capable of what it was 10 years ago. So they don't have an understanding of individuality. They will always strive to achieve what the instructor is doing, not what the instructor is telling them to do. Yeah. If they see somebody on television taking an energy drink, then they'll take the energy drink because somebody else has done it, as opposed to understanding their nutritional needs. If you go back to Robbie Fowler and Liverpool Football Club and a white strip across your nose, and Paula Radcliffe wearing a white strip across the nose, fundamentally, scientific principles say there is absolutely no benefit whatsoever because you don't breathe through your nose when you do exercise.
Yeah.
But thousands upon thousands of people spent millions of pounds buying things. So there's an understanding and a conceptual, what am I doing, as opposed to what's everybody else doing. Yeah. So I think the biggest misunderstanding is not understanding they are an individual and what their body needs and requires.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was like, it kind of feeds into that, that, was it Gladwell did that, the 10,000 hour... Was that you?
Yeah, sorry, that was me.
You know that the 10,000 hour rule, where you've got to put your 10,000 hours in to become an expert. Which is, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Which has been debunked, and like it's like the evidence that it was based on, that was definitely an average hour of a very specific set of musicians in the West Berlin Academy of Music or whatever it was. But like, people just want that generic idea, don't they? That generic answer: do this, get this.
And it's throughout all aspects. The other 10,000 number was the number of steps you're supposed to take a day.
Yeah.
Now, none of these numbers can be true.
Yeah.
Because the number of steps you take and need, and the number of steps I take and need, are different.
Yeah.
And there is the 10,000 steps was actually a Japanese number.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because a Japanese breakfast cereal company gave away free pedometers as a gimmick, and they wanted to give people a number to attain, and 10,000 was a big number.
Well,
and because the decision had been made, because the decision had been made, it was never challenged. So it got out into the public, and then it was transferred internationally, and then it becomes law. Everybody in the world knows that you need to take 10,000 steps a day.
And also in Japanese, the number system is different. So it goes like the counting. So you go kind of 1, 10,000, 10,000. So it's like ichi, ju, hyaku, sen, man, and man is translated as 10,000. So it was just that next one up, rather than we have
the next
a million,
logical
right?
step.
Yeah. It's like
there's no science there.
Yeah, it's like the recommendations of getting your 5 a day fruit and veg portions. Well, in France it's 7, and the reason why it's 5 was because the British government said, "Oh, we recommend that you have 5 servings of fresh fruit and veg a day," is because they thought that's the most we can get away with, and people would follow. Yeah. like you should be having loads of fruit and veg a day, not 5. You know what I mean? So cool.
Yeah,
okay.
This is the sort of the public health population message versus an individual message.
Yeah.
And as martial artists, we're all individuals who need to take responsibility for our individual needs and requirements. And what we end up doing is following population messages.
Yeah.
It's like following a YouTube influencer.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're big because they're population based and they're popular.
Yeah.
But it's not. We need to be focusing on ourselves and what our body needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, right. That was too easy for you to finish with. I'm going to ask you one more difficult one.
Okay.
Okay. So, I'll ask you this one. So, recently I've been talking about kind of the stress shorten cycle with your muscles, and also kind of these the maximum strength of your muscle. So I was talking. It was from a conversation with Steve Hombu Sensei, and he was talking about how when you contract a muscle, there's a kind of a bell curve of strength, and also like how the plyometrics stretch when your muscle is being stretched, and then you contract it, you can create far more explosive power. Can you tell us anything about that, and can you tell us how we would use that in our karate?
Well, we'll do the sort of the plyometric eccentric thing first.
Okay.
When muscles, so take your bicep and you contract your bicep, and it bulges, it gets shortened. So your muscle is shortening. It's a concentric contraction.
Yeah.
There's a force production or a maximal strength you can get from a concentric contraction. If I then take hold of that arm and stretch it out with you resisting against it, then that muscle is contracting, but it's getting longer. And that's an eccentric contraction.
Okay.
You can produce higher forces or bigger strengths in an eccentric contraction.
What? So if I'm trying to get into count. So if I'm just bending my arm like this, the amount of power I can create from this contraction compared to doing this, is that what you're saying? No.
So
doing that.
Yes.
Okay. So
if your arm is lengthening, so it's like picking up a weight. If you try and pick up a dumbbell, and bicep curl it, there's a limit to how much you can pick up.
Yeah.
But if you get given a bigger weight, you can lower it down slowly. you're creating more force in the lowering and the stretching of the muscle, or the length of the muscle, than you can. So if you take that concept and you put it into a dynamic movement, then you can generate bigger forces in the muscle when there's an eccentric movement. So athletes for many, many years have used plyometric training to generate high forces in the muscles in order to get the muscle stronger. But they've done box jumping and hurdle bouncing and two-footed and single leg hops, etc. So there's all these activities that we do which include plyometrics and eccentric contractions, which we use as a training principle for getting the muscle stronger. The problem with it is that those higher forces mean you're much more likely to damage the muscle. So if a beginner who hasn't done much training tries eccentric contractions, they're much more likely to injure themselves. So plyometrics and eccentric work is always introduced in an athlete's training program only once they've attained a level of strength and training experience, etc. But it is used widely as a method to increase your strength, maximal strength, or your explosive power, or whatever else you want to call it.
So it's used as a training mechanism to train your body to get it stronger. Can it be used in a technique to produce stronger amount of power, or is it only used to train your body and then you go back to regular kind of use of muscle? Because if I'm training my body, if I'm training my bicep by doing that, but ultimately that's what I want to do, then I can't.
Your concentric contraction will get better. So you will ultimately get stronger in that muscle. So there is a transfer effect from the contraction in the eccentric to the concentric mode. So you'll get better concentric contractions, but your musculature in general will get better. You'll get a better, all the tendons will be put under a bigger load, as will fascia, etc. Your neuromuscular system will be more highly activated, and you'll also get slightly bigger gains. But it's not a direct transfer. You're not going to suddenly become hugely strength from your concentric bicep movement by doing eccentric contractions.
Cool. So what about stretch, shorten, cycle?
Well, you said stretch, shorten, cycle, but you also mentioned the force tension relationship. So length. So there is, if we take the force length relationship there, and we go back to the analogy of the bicep and the dumbbell. If you put a large dumbbell in your hand and your arm is straight, you can't start the movement. But if somebody lets you start the movement as your bicep gets shorter, you can actually produce more strength, or you'll have more force, and therefore you can then lift the bicep the rest of the way. But you can't start it because you're weaker at one end or either end, and you're stronger in the middle of the length of that muscle. So being at the extreme ranges of a muscular length, you're at the weakest portions of the muscle, and you'll be strongest in the middle portion. Now, if you look at how this translates to karate or punching, you'll find that boxers can put people down with body shots. But those body shots are inevitably delivered with a very bent arm. They're very close shots. If you're doing a very long straight arm jab, at the end of that movement, you've got much less power on the end. To create large impacts at long distance, they tend to swing lots of distance, so they've got more a long way around. So you end up being short techniques in a close-in position can be developed very, very strongly because you're working in different areas of the muscle.
Because it was something that was highlighted to us in the spring when we were with Steve Hombu Sensei, and he referred to it as the impact phase of the technique, and he was talking about how he broke up every muscle contraction into 3/3. First third and last third being, well, I think third is a bit too extreme, but like you're saying you want to kind of really aim for that middle third of your contraction of your muscle to be the impact point of the technique, because for sure, like we kind of use the analogy or the example of just a straight chokuzuki, like when your fist leaves your hip that, and you get your elbow to your hip point. That first third not so strong, but then that middle third, as you can transition through the punch, is very strong, and then that last third is dramatically reducing in power as your arm straightens. And he was saying that every technique should have that impact phase in mind, where you're hitting at that middle third rather than the last third. But predominantly when we practice Kihon Kata, we always allow our body to go to the full extension, or hand or foot to go to the full extension, which is arguably the weakest, or partly the weakest part of the technique transition. That's what I mean.
Yeah, and there's lots of different concepts in what Steve's saying there.
Yeah.
In the translating a muscular contraction to a whole body movement is almost impossible, because you have so many muscles involved in a single movement.
Yeah.
But what he's saying is that the functional output as a composition of all those muscular contractions is quite correct. And anybody hitting a macro board, or hitting a heavy bag, or hitting an opponent, will know that your hardest impact will be that Tatazuki.
Yeah.
That before you've elongated the elbow, before you've reached, and that the full technique that we do, and this comes back to how I look at karate as a training method, is that we're actually doing thousand punches training, and we're training across a range. But if we ever used it, we'd want to use the best one, which is the bit in the middle.
Yeah.
So if I am actually going to hit somebody, I'm not going to prepare Chakuzuki and hit them at the very last bit in the correct distance. And I want to hit them in a Tatazuki as everything's coming together well. But if you train for completeness, then you will be able to carry out that middle portion. If you don't train to completeness, and you only train the first portion, the second portion, you won't maximize that training effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we always do overload training in all sorts of sports. We always make sure that if you're a 100-meter sprinter, they'll do lots of short sprints that are not 100, and lots of longer sprints that are over 100.
Yeah. But
their actual gain in the performance is at that 100-meter mark.
Yeah.
And what we do is train a lot in order to perform a little.
Yeah. I always use the example of the sprinter, who trains with the parachute on the back, and thinking, well, that's ridiculous. How can you possibly run fast with a parachute on your back? Exactly, that's the point. And it's no different from having a long stance, or a big preparation of blocks, or a very long technique for punching and all that kind of stuff. So we're kind of stretching our body, so then when it does need to be used, it can be used in this kind of devastating way. Yeah.
And it's a fundamental principle of training. It's the overload principle, in that you have to overload the muscle in order for the muscle to respond, and therefore get an adaptation.
Yeah.
If you don't overload, you'll never respond, and if you don't respond, you can't therefore learn to adapt.
Yeah.
So you have to be pushed in order to get an adaptation, which you will then use, not in the same scenario that you've overloaded.
Yeah. Cool. Excellent. That was an excellent answer, because I'm forever, I was in Romania kind of last month, and I was talking to the class, and I said, where do you think the strongest part of the punch is? And there was, I don't know, 30 odd black belts in the class, and every single one of them said, right at the end, that's the strongest point of the punch. And I was like, have you never thought about this? Or more importantly, have you never punched anything? And they were all very senior. But yeah.
But I think that point is exactly it. That they probably thought about it an awful lot.
Yeah, exactly.
But their thinking has been based around the fact that they've spent 10,000 punches in midair.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they haven't actually hit. Yeah. I mean, literally, I was in Kew University in Japan with the old boys, and one of them said to me, "You trained old," and I'm assuming he didn't mean I was old. It was I'd done an old style of I hit things.
Oh, okay.
And he was explaining to a youngster about hitting the macro board, and so I hit it a couple of times, and he said, "Yes, like that."
Yeah. And
then the youngster hit it, and he's like, "No, not like that."
Yeah.
And it was, well, I'm hitting it the same as he's hitting it. It's like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
And I actually grew up hitting things, where it's this guy spent 10 years, 15 years training, and then started hitting things. and you develop differently.
Yeah.
So they probably have thought about it an awful lot,
Yeah.
but they don't have that biofeedback, that environmental learning that some of us got by accident.
Yeah.
Or well, not accident, by having a great instructor.
Yeah. The only present that my instructor ever gave me was on my 16th birthday, and he gave me a makiwara. It's like, that's for you. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it makes a big difference.
The best present we could have given you.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. Cool. Okay, well, you answered the hard question right at the end, so I think we will call it a day there and say thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed this, so I think we should do it more often, don't you?
I'm more than happy to answer questions and chat. I enjoyed it myself.
Cool. So what we'll do is we will post this to the wide, unsuspecting masses and invite them to ask further questions. And when we get enough questions, we'll do another one. How's that?
Good.
Okay. Right.
Excellent.
Well, I'm going to stop this and say thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,